China and Cuba cooperation grows stronger. Both countries are moving ahead as partners in the Belt and Road Initiative. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. The China and Cuba relationship is about to get much closer, with both countries working together as Belt and Road Initiative partners. Their BRI cooperation is set to expand, with Beijing helping Havana upscale its new energy sector. This will help Cuba move towards green development. And as CGTN's Cuba correspondent, Luis Chirino, reports, they are already moving forward as partners in the telecommunications field.
Cuba recognizes the significance of its participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative. It's especially important when it comes to sectors like telecommunications and projects involving mobile telephone service, data transmission, and digital television.
Cuba not only adopted the Chinese digital TV standard, but also infrastructure for the terrestrial digital TV broadcast and the production of TV sets and equipment of the Chinese system.
According to Gonzalez, digital TV reaches more than 3/4, 76.2% of the Cuban population in standard definition, and nearly half, that's 45.7%, in high definition. CGTN visited the plant assembling equipment for the ongoing transition from analog to digital TV.
In cooperation with the sister nation of China, we manufacture TV converter boxes. We plan to produce 326,000 boxes this year.
The manufacture of TV converters based on Chinese technology is crucial to guarantee the current expansion of digital TV in Cuba, even under the conditions imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Despite the economic and social impact of the coronavirus, information technologies have offered Cubans a promising option to deal with the pandemic.
Even with COVID-19, the telecommunications sector has not stopped growing, and this is shown by the ongoing development of the communications infrastructure and our support of the education process through web platforms.
In recent years, Cuba has developed a mobile communications infrastructure, first by opening cybercafes in hotspots, and more recently 3G and 4G data services, all with Chinese technology. Currently, more than 7 million Cubans are connected to the internet, with still a fraction of ADSL home connections. Despite COVID-19, Cuban families like the Almanzas can work from home thanks to their internet connection.
This is very useful. I can keep in contact with my clients. My wife can work from home during the pandemic, while my daughter can download books for her university studies.
Cubans have faced limited access to outside resources during the pandemic, but officials say Cuba is expected to keep developing projects in the best interest of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and telecommunications will be a big part of it going forward. Luis Chirino, CGTN, Havana.
There is much to discuss, and joining me now from Havana is Carlos Alzugaray. He is a former Cuban diplomat and educator. With us too from Beijing is Victor Gao. He is an international relations expert and is also chair professor at Soochow University. Joining us from New York is Brian Becker. He is the executive director of the ANSWER Coalition. And with us too from Havana is CGTN's Cuba correspondent, Luis Chirino, whose report you just heard. Welcome to all of you to the show. And Luis Chirino, tell us more about this new partnership in developing the country's energy sector. What sort of assistance will China be providing, and how will it help Cuba?
Oh, thank you, Anna, for having me. Well, as we've seen in this report, the governments of China and Cuba, the two countries, have already begun for some time now to unleash a cooperation in this field. And this entry of Cuba in the Belt and Road Energy Alliance, of course, will favor a long time and far-reaching programs in terms of renewable energy for Cuba to favor the economic sectors, and particularly telecommunications as well, as we've seen. For instance, Cuba is now involved. It is a priority for the Cuban government to develop a far-reaching program in terms of developing clean energy. In this case, we're talking about the setting up of wind fields as well as solar energy parks, which are quite developed today, as we saw in that industry, which is setting up large areas to produce energy for the factory to operate. And this program aims at having producing 24% of the energy of clean energy in Cuba by the year 2030. It's a very ambitious program. Today, 94% of the energy produced in the country is based on fossil fuels. So it's going to be a change of the matrix, energy matrix of the country. And this is where China would play a very important and beneficial role for this Cuban program in terms of introducing infrastructure, of funding infrastructure for Cuba to develop all these areas. For instance, the development of biomass processors is one of the most important elements in this cooperation with China, which is ongoing in this minute with Chinese technology, particularly in central Cuba. For instance, I would like just to mention an example of a sugar mill, which is operating already with biomass energy based on biomass processing. Right. And they're also thinking of setting up another one. So it is going to be a very beneficial entry of Cuba in this energy alliance with China. Of course it is.
Victor Gao, from China's perspective, how significant is this new partnership on energy? What do you think it will achieve?
Well, first of all, allow me to express my high admiration to the Cuban people. I did visit the island back in 1988, and it has left me with very deep, favorable impressions. Between China and Cuba, the two countries have respected each other, treated each other as partners, as brothers and sisters, ever since the early 1960s. And the relations have always been very solid, despite of all these changes. And also by today, China and Cuba are very, very two different economies. Each has its own advantages. Now, China is a major power country in the world, especially in new and renewable energy like wind and solar, for example. And in this regard, China can definitely share its experience with Cuba in many ways, including, very interestingly, in oil and gas exploration and production. After all, Cuba is very geographically located in the middle of this Gulf of Mexico, and we believe that Cuba actually has large reserves in oil and in gas, but new and renewable energy will be more important because of this climate change impact. And China is also the largest manufacturer of all kinds of electronics, for example, 5G telecommunication, and China is leading the wave in many important ways in the new economy, digital economy. So I would say China can share its experience and capacities with Cuba. On the other hand, China can learn from Cuba in terms of drug making, for example, as well as public health. So these two countries treat each other as an equal, sharing their experience, resources, capabilities, can truly be a win-win situation. Talking about Belt and Road, of course, Cuba is very geographically located in a very important position in the middle of the Caribbean, and this will truly make the Belt and Road not only a Eurasian African concept, but also a Latin American, South American, Central American concept as well.
Ambassador Alzugaray, as Cuba looks to developing its economy, how does it view the relationship with China? Is this a win-win?
Of course. Thank you, Alan, first of all. Yes, it's obviously very important for Cuba to have a partnership with China, not only because China is the second largest economy in the world today, but also because China's technological and scientific achievements are very good for Cuba. And plus, China has the correct attitude in terms of cooperation. Cooperation is a two-way street in which everyone should win. And as Professor Gao said, yes, both sides are winning in this relationship. Now, bear in mind that Cuba is in a very difficult position internationally because of the U.S. Unilateral coercive measures that we call the blockade. These measures make it very difficult for Cuba to access finance, to access technology, because there is a persecution of the U.S. Government on any transaction that Cuba does. Now, since China is a very independent country and has its own interests and doesn't allow countries like the United States to impose on them the kind of limitations that other countries accept, it is very important for Cuba to maintain that relationship. I would like to refer that especially in terms of digital technologies, in terms of energy, China is an example of technological development and at the same time environmental friendly development. So for Cuba is very significant, and Cuba can offer China what Professor Gao mentioned. Cuba is in a very important position right in the middle of the Western Hemisphere. It is a crossroads for a relationship between any country that comes to Cuba can access markets all over the region, with the exception, of course, of the United States. And Cuba has excellent relations with most of the 34 countries of the region, so it is a win-win situation for both sides.
Brian Becker, this economic engagement between Cuba and China, it comes at a time when the Biden administration is failing to engage with Cuba in any meaningful way, in any kind of positive way. So how will the United States, how will Washington be looking at these growing economic ties between China and Cuba?
I'd have to say that the Biden administration's attitude towards Cuba has been a huge disappointment, and I'm speaking mildly. Here you had President Barack Obama reopen embassies in Washington and Havana with the Cuban government. The first time in 54 years the embassies reopened. That was in 2014. Then Donald Trump came in and basically put the brakes on to any possible Cuba-U.S. normalization, and in fact added 243 additional coercive measures to make life harder for Cubans, to use food and medicine as a collective punishment tool, as a weapon against the Cuban people. And sadly, Joe Biden has refused to lift any of those coercive measures. And in fact, we know, and the Cubans well know, that the Biden administration, using the NED, the National Endowment of Democracy, so-called, using USAID, using CIA, using nonprofit organizations, is engaged in a highly coordinated destabilization campaign, trying to take advantage of the economic suffering that the Cuban people are enduring because of the blockade, a fortified blockade, and then trying to foment protests in opposition to the government. It's really terrible that the U.S. is using food and medicine as a weapon, as a collective weapon against Cuba to destabilize it. The U.S. government will now see that China and Cuba are forging a deeper, wider economic relationship, and this will be viewed with great animus and hostility by Washington, which only wants to overthrow the Cuban Revolution. Again, not because Cuba poses a national security threat, but the U.S. doesn't want Cuba to be a good example for the rest of Latin America, so it's trying to undermine the Cuban project.
Luis Chirino, as we heard from Victor Gao as well as Ambassador Alzugaray, the United States is putting pressure on other countries that want to do business with China, especially in the technology sector. But if we look here, you were telling us earlier on about the telecommunications sector in Cuba. Can you tell us a bit more about that? How critical is cooperation with China? And is China, for instance, prepared to embrace companies like Huawei and its technology? And we know that the United States has imposed sanctions on this company.
All right. Obviously, it's obvious that China and Cuba have expressed a very strong will to cooperate amidst the situation that Cuba is facing. with this, what the United States call the comprehensive trade embargo against Cuba. They call it comprehensive because they know that it affects all spheres of society in Cuba. And in this case, Cuba has looked at China, despite the fact that it's so far from this part of the world, to introduce in Cuba all this technology dealing with digital TV. For instance, we are adapting, or Cuba is adapting, or adopting the Chinese digital television system, as well as the technology for cellular phone communications. This is also Chinese. And if you go to Cuban homes now, there is a program to install ADSLs also of Chinese technology so that people can communicate. And this has provided the people of Cuba the possibility of growing into this digital world, in having telecommunications with high quality, in having their own cell phones, and the number of Cubans that have join in this technology and these possibilities and access to this technology has been huge, and it's growing every single day. And this is something that I think, in my opinion, that is going to be growing, that has no step backwards, even if Cuba or if the United States could ever again try to benefit Cuba with some of its technology, which so far has been prohibited in terms of any kind of inputs of parts or equipment. Just to tell you an example, any kind of equipment either for digital television or for whatever, or even for producing power in our thermoelectric plants, is prohibited for Cuba if it has 10% American components. So this tells you that Cuba has to look at other horizons. And China has been there with us for many, many years. China and Cuba have maintained a very strong friendship relationship, or relation of friendship and solidarity and support in every aspect of life, particularly in terms of other fields. For instance, just a couple of days ago, Cuba and China marked the 10th anniversary of the first collaboration in medicine,
yep.
Cubans in China. Cuba and China also have collaboration in many other fields like biotechnology, you know, and I think that there is a very strong relationship, and that includes the digital world as well.
Okay. Victor Gao, this latest initiative by China in Cuba's energy sector is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. So put this into perspective for us. That initiative by China, if it's part of its broad plan to help the developing world, especially as far as infrastructure is concerned. So give us the bigger picture here.
Well, first of all, I would say Belt and Road Initiative at its very core is connectivity. It involves all kinds of infrastructure. You are talking about highways, railways, airports, seaports, connectivity of all kinds. Eventually, it's also cyber connectivity as well as financial connectivity. Why China is so interested and eager to do this and share this with the rest of the world? Because China learned through its own experiences that without connectivity, without infrastructure, you are not in a position to talk about rapid economic development. These are all enabling technologies and connectivity projects. So China wants to see that the world is more connected, different parts, different countries, etc. With what purpose? For more trade, for better understanding, so that people in different parts of the country, the world, can really trade for a premium their commodities and their products to markets far away for a premium. This is the complementarity of different economies, and this is the true essence of globalization. So, Belt and Road Initiative focusing on connectivity and infrastructure. This is truly very important for a big, important island country like Cuba, especially being subject to US blockade or embargo, not for 1 year, but ever since the beginning of the 1960s. It's really crazy. So I hope Cubans and the Cuban government will have the courage to see that even though they are subject to US-imposed embargoes and blockades, there is a big country, after all, China is much, much bigger than Cuba, which is ready to and always committed to treat Cuba as a brother and sister on an equal basis and share its technologies, capacities, manufacturing capacities with the Cuban brothers and sisters, so they can be really brought into the global fold of economic development and expansion. I think this is the true essence of a difference between China versus the United States. The United States want to eliminate Cuba as an alternative development model for Latin America.
Right.
China wants to make sure that the Cuban people have the right to choose their own form of government, their own role of development, and the world should be big enough for different models to get along with each other. And I think this BRI initiative for Cuba is absolutely the very important thing, because it will enable the Cuban people and the Cuban companies to thrive and excel, not only in Cuba, but in many other parts of the world.
Ambassador Alzugaray, the United States has become increasingly confrontational with China over the last few years. We've seen that. How will Latin American countries respond to this? Latin American countries, including Cuba, will they at some point be forced to choose sides?
Well, I think that the United States is making a big mistake in carrying out what, as an international relations specialist, I see like a new Cold War. It's really disappointing that the Biden administration has gone back to Cold War tactics and Cold War strategies against not only China, but against Russia, and not only China and Russia, but also Latin America and the Caribbean. President Obama had a more nuanced view of international relations. He trusted more on diplomacy. With Trump, we went back to imposing sanctions, to imposing its will. And as a matter of fact, Mr. Trump tried to revive the Monroe Doctrine that is universally resented and rejected in Latin America. And Mr. Biden has not been able to project an image that he's not interested in a more cooperative position in Latin America. Now, China's position in Latin America and the Caribbean has been growing, and has been growing on the basis of two things. One, trade and investment relations, which Latin Americans perceive as really equal, as really cooperation.
Right.
And secondly, China doesn't pursue a policy of political conditionality as the United States does. So for most Latin American countries, the relationship with China is very, very positive, because we have access to Chinese technology, Chinese progress, and then even though China is a big power and could behave as a big power, China doesn't behave in Latin America and the Caribbean as a big power. Yeah. It behaves as just another partner, respects sovereignties, respects self-determination, doesn't impose political conditions on the rest of Latin America. I think that is highly appreciated in the region.
Brian, here's something that might need explaining. We just heard Ambassador Alzugaray tell us there that former President Barack Obama did make some progress towards improving the United States relationship with Cuba. He went to Cuba, he met with Raul Castro, he restored diplomatic relations. And then, of course, President Trump came along and undid all of that. Now we have President Biden, who belongs to the same party as President Obama, in fact, who served in the Obama administration, who's not done anything to change that. How does one explain that?
Well, if you look back at the history of U.S.-Cuba relations since January 1st, 1959, when the July 26th movement led by Fidel Castro took power and replaced the U.S.-backed dictatorship of Batista, every administration, Democrat and Republican, have worked nonstop to embargo, to blockade, to surveil, to invade, to destabilize, and to support terrorist actions against the people of Cuba. Thousands of Cubans have died as a consequence of this policy, which was bipartisan, Democrat and Republican. The U.S., under the Democratic administration of JFK, supported the Bay of Pigs invasion. There was almost thermonuclear war with the Soviet Union in October 1962. You name it, each administration has gone forward. In 2014, when President Barack Obama announced that the U.S. would reopen its embassy in Havana and Cuba could reopen its embassy in Washington, Barack Obama said, look, the U.S. policy has not worked. We haven't undone the Cuban Revolution. We haven't overthrown it. And in fact, it's made America isolated in Latin America, where the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban leadership is beloved. So Barack Obama said, we have become isolated. We have to change course. Now, what I think has happened in the last couple months, as the economic coercive measures imposed by Trump have gotten worse, as Cuba had to cancel its tourism industry, where it got most of its foreign capital in defiance of the blockade, Cuba became a more difficult economic situation. So now the old bipartisan policy of destabilization and overthrow and regime change becomes operational once again in full force under Biden, because they're like sharks in the water that smell blood. Instead of carrying out a policy of hostility, the American people see Cuba as a neighbor. We just placed a big ad in the New York Times that said, let Cuba live. End the blockade. The people of the world want it to end. The Cubans want it to end. And the majority of Americans want it to end. And Joe Biden needs to get that message.
All right, Luis Chirino, I've just got a little bit of time left, but I do want to talk about climate change and Cuba. Of course, the big COP26 conference is winding down in Glasgow in Scotland. We know that Cuba has already felt the impact of climate change. It's seen hurricanes. How is the country preparing for these challenges posed by climate change and also the shift to a greener economy?
Right. For some years now, Cuba has launched and followed a national effort which is called Life Task. Life Task is an environmental program, a far-reaching environmental program to mitigate and adapt to climate change. This is the objective of this program particularly. And it addresses areas, particularly coastal areas, where climate change has had a very hard and strong impact in communities, in low-lying communities, and in areas where these people have had their livelihood in danger because of these increasing natural phenomena like hurricanes, like ocean floods and surge that have destroyed their homes, etc. So what the government is now doing is trying to relocate some of these communities, something that is not so easy to do because, you know, the people maintain a culture in the areas where they've grown all their lives and where they have worked. But there's a kind of an educative program within this huge task that tells the people about the needs to relocate some of them, some others adapt in the areas. They prohibit constructions, new constructions near areas where these phenomena are hitting the island. That's for the most part of it. And also important enough is the care of the river basins, for instance. River basins in Cuba, in areas in different provinces, are running very clean. There's been studies about that, and that's something that goes also is a very environmental friendly programs. People here are investigating on those issues.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. You have been watching The Heat. I'm Arnold Naidu. Thanks for watching.